It's Monday, February 3rd, 2014, and you're listening to SYN Boldly, the podcast of the Sign Your Name Project. I'm your host, Trey Comstock, and with me this week is Stephen Doss.
Hello.
Kathleen has the week off because we are officially recording on the wrong night. However, we are still here to bring you the top news, including a rundown of a Super Bowl commercial, the latest abortion numbers, and an extended discussion on pastoral care in the midst of tragedy. However, we start tonight with a Super Bowl ad in the news. So, Stephen, there was some kerfuffle over an ad in the Super Bowl. Please explain this to me.
Oh, yes. The worst thing that happened at the Super Bowl was the game. Boom! Take that, Broncos
There wasn't a
fan.
game. I'm sorry. I don't care about either team. I was vaguely pulling for Denver, but I am unaware that a game occurred.
Well, the big thing we're going to talk about today is that God hated the Denver Broncos, apparently, and loved the Seattle Seahawks. That's
factual.
I do believe that God chooses stuff in
thus says the
events.
Lord of Hosts. It's in the Old Testament somewhere
Probably
that they
somewhere,
were going to lose.
Yes. But it's
actually because of all the pot. We figured it out.
Blaze up.
It's because of all the pot, and so God hates them, and so they lost. It's just like what happened in New Orleans.
But Seattle has legalized it too.
Seattle's legalized pot too?
Yes.
I'm out. That was my only theory.
Okay, all right. But I have a theory about this one Super Bowl ad made by a company that's very near and dear to our hearts here in Atlanta, and if you're a member of the Emery family...
your endowment.
Your endowment. Coca-Cola. And Coca-Cola set this really awesome... I thought it was a really awesome and well-done ad.
For a Super Bowl ad?
For a Super Bowl ad. Promoting, diversity. And what happened was they had someone singing America the Beautiful, which, number one, I think should be our national anthem.
It is slightly less militaristic.
Slightly less militaristic. Not as militaristic as France's, which says we're going to... Yeah, which says we are going to, kill all the Spanish or something like that? Something like that. Anywho... But America the Beautiful is played and sung, and it's sung lovely, and it's also sung in Spanish and Hebrew and Arabic and German and French and all sorts of different languages, many of which are spoken in the United States.
And showing kind of a wide diversity of ethnicities
and families.
What I keep thinking is the human color palette that is the United States. All the different tones. It's actually really cool ad.
Yeah, and I mean, it prides us, and we are one of the few countries out there that is very ethnically diverse. I mean, you go over to Europe and you'll have a country that's 99% Polish, which would be Poland,
and not even just 99% white, 99% ethnically Polish.
Yeah.
It's so if a Brit went over to France, they would be an outsider and be way in the minority, not because they're white, but because they're not French or a Frank.
But
not named Frank, but a Frank, the historic nation of France.
France, yes. And so, but apparently this got people all up in a flutter on the Twitters.
Were they a Twitter on the Twitters?
They were a Twitter on the Twitters. They were twitting all over the place.
Were they tweeting a mess up?
They were tweeting the mess up. One of the hashtags were fornicate roughly Coke. Although they didn't use fornicate roughly, they used a four-letter word.
We don't swear on this
show. There are people listening that probably don't like swearing. And we try to keep it PG-13 here. All about how this is America, we should speak English. And there was also, they showed various groups of families, and they showed a same-sex couple.
They missed. I honestly God missed that
It was
part.
2 seconds, but that got people in a kerfluffle too. And I just want to know is one of the things in the Old Testament is treating they use the term treating the alien as your own countrymen. Well, the people they were promoting, they aren't aliens. They aren't foreigners in a foreign land. They are citizens of the United States of America.
So here's the the implicit racism needs to go away.
Yes.
That somehow white people are more American than brown people. Okay? I think we've at least accepted that African Americans are American. That's not, they don't normally get called foreigners.
Yep.
They are underrepresented and racism is real, but they're in this kind of debate, if we had seen only black and white, I don't think it would have raised the kerfuffle.
Yeah,
right?
I don't
if
think
all
so.
we had seen was Christmas and Kwanzaa, no one would have had a problem.
Yeah.
But it's the Ramadan and the Hanukkah that it's starting to raise the issue.
And the Tet.
Yes.
Don't forget Tet.
Oh, yeah. And the Pride Week.
Yeah. Yeah.
Sorry. But I think there is this kind of implicit thing that brown equals not American. So my family's been here less than, many branches of my family have been here less than 100 years. There are Mexican, what we call Hispanics or Latinos, that have been in Texas longer than there were white people in Texas. Okay? So the white people don't get there to the 1800s. Who do you think was there before them? Why do you think there was necessitated 2 different wars with Mexico in order to liberate Texas? Okay? So let's think about that for a second. They have been in that territory longer than there have been white people in America. So what qualifies as American? If it is simply longevity of who was here for it first, you pilgrim descendants aren't looking so hot.
No.
Because Spain had some very successful colonies.
St. Augustine is the oldest city in the United States, and it was Spanish.
Right. Okay.
Until we bought it.
Until, quite literally, we purchased it. We also purchased New York. Or we didn't. The Dutch did. But anyways. White people did. We, white people. That's awkward. But look, I'm sorry. The more south and west you go, especially, but not exclusively, we are simply a vaguely brown country.
Yeah.
And, deal with that. It's not, A, it's not all just recent immigrants. B, even if it was just recent immigrants, I'm sorry. We are an immigrant nation. And I guess it is just as American to hate whoever came after you, right? That is an American trend that goes on and on and on and on, right? So the Germans hated the Irish, and then the Irish, this has always been happening. Every time a new wave of immigrants shows up, they get hated on. And then once there's another wave after them, they hate on that wave. Remember, the KKK was founded to hate on Polish people. Think about that for a second. The KKK was founded not over issues of white and black, but of issues over Polish or not Polish.
I actually did not know that.
Yeah, it's fascinating, isn't it?
That's very fascinating in a very horrible kind of way. But yeah, it's one of those things. It's like we have a tendency to embrace this kind of American ideal, which just happens to be everyone looks the same as me and everyone speaks the same as me. Is that really the
American dream?
That's not the American dream. The American dream is people coming together from all walks of life, and heck, if you're a strong capitalist, you want
them. Yeah, let's just do that. It's terrible.
If you can't see, I'm doing air quotes.
He did some air quotes with his mouth.
Yes.
For the audio listeners.
Yes. We want them to be able to come to this country to use their skills and to build themselves up, because that's the way capitalism is supposed to work. And so if you're a staunch capitalist Republican, yay, you're supposed to like this.
Oddly enough, the capitalist Republicans tend to be in favor of relatively reasonable immigration.
Good.
I've been doing a lot of research into this because I'm going to be doing some work on the border in March. And so I've been kind of doing my background research. And it turns out that there's, a really strong strain in the Republican Party that's like, yeah, let them in. It's good for business.
It is good for business.
It turns out that one of the big arguments against Latino immigration is, they're a burden on the system. Well, A, they pay taxes and get no benefit from it because it's automatically taken from their paychecks. They also spend money in the United States. So actually it turns out if you do the math, roughly they probably come out as a net income for the states that they're in.
Yeah.
So stop whining. And generally speaking, we are all human. And those who are citizens, no matter what color they are all Americans. Mm-hmm. And the United States has no official language, so deal with it.
Yes, and we are, get this, like we said that we are one of the most ethnically diverse countries in the world. We are also one of 4 that does not have an official language. Australia doesn't.
Right. Because because that's a huge fight between the Anglos and the Aboriginals.
Yep. Germany does not. Which is interesting.
Because it's technically a federation, too.
Yeah.
We forget about it. We think of monolithic Germany.
Yeah.
But that's a really, really recent concept. So I get that.
Yep. Mexico.
Okay, sure. Because, again, you have a lot of issues with Native people.
Native American.
Yeah, mm-hmm. Okay.
And the United States. Which you can't have one because, I mean, everybody here, let's be honest, most people in the United States speaks English. However, a lot of people can speak a second or third language, and it's like, well,
but also,
what's the point? Yeah.
But also, we are an immigrant nation.
We are, very much so.
And sure, like, my Scots-Irish ancestors spoke a version of English when they showed up. But we, up until very, very late in the 18th century, very late in the 20th century, very late in the 19th into the earliest 20th century, there were whole, like, German-speaking Methodist congregations.
Oh, yeah.
And, like, a whole, like, German-speaking outreach mm-hmm. wing.
And one of the things that, we think about in church is church should be a community that anyone can come to. And a lot of people need some form of comfort in that, and they need to be able to speak their language. That's why we have a lot of we're based out of Atlanta for now.
That's fixing to change.
And then up in the city of Duluth, there's a large Korean population. There's a lot of Korean churches that speak Korean because you want to have some symbol of your past in there. I think, for me, as I grew up, I don't know anything about my heritage. I just know that I lovingly say that my ancestors are when white met trash.
I think you're being a little hard on yourself.
Yes.
But I'll throw this point out there, and then we need to move on to our next story.
Yep.
And I just wrote a paper on kind of
la-di-da.
Yeah.
Writing.
Yeah, writing. So I did just write a paper.
Told that teacher lady only letters I needed were U, S, and A.
Wonderful. So I just wrote this paper on how the church feeds segregation, and specifically linguistic segregation. Yeah. Because while there are a lot of Korean churches and a lot of Latino churches, or a lot of like Spanish language services at white churches, I have never seen a truly blended service. So when I was in Kenya has like 6 official languages. It's crazy. And so the Catholic priest, for the benefit of us, did the service in 3 languages. Mm-hmm. And so it's just different parts made sense to different people. And it was this cool linguistic blend. And so I got about a third of the service, which was enough. It was the Mass. So I kind of knew what else was going on. But we don't see that in the United States. And so I think it's really easy if you look in most churches mm-hmm. to think, oh, we're an English-speaking country.
Yeah.
Because, we may offer English classes, and that's great.
Yeah.
Or we may offer a Spanish language service, and that's okay.
Mm-hmm.
But what I argue is, if we want to truly be about being one body, mm-hmm. we need to have one service where many languages are, not like we have one random cultural night, but like one service where you consistently hear more than one language, which is becoming increasingly the reality in the United States.
Yes.
So speaking of new realities in the United States, headline off of Fox News, and we just pulled Fox News as the source.
It was the first one that popped up. We weren't specifically looking for Fox News.
Fox News is reporting off of an AP story. U.S. abortion rate at lowest level since 1973.
And Trey, guess what happened in 1973?
What happened in 1973?
Roe versus Wade.
So it's the lowest rate since Roe v. Wade. And this isn't, bum some bum off the street statistic. This is Guttmacher Institute, which is a very well respected researcher in issues of sexual reproductive health. I mean, in public health, in my public health studies, they're one of our kind of go-to sources for abortion numbers or contraceptive numbers worldwide. I mean, they're a very well respected research institute. This is not, I polled 4 people and they said they had fewer abortions. No, this is like for real. So let me give you.
I would hope if you asked 4 people, none of them would have had an abortion.
Well, I mean, it's 16.9. So let me give you the numbers. Abortions have fallen they have fallen 13% between 2008 and 2011. Now, that's key to remember that 2011 is before all these kind of rollback laws, anti-abortion laws, these kind of things were really spinning up. So you can't go, oh, well, it's because the laws were worse. No, the laws are pretty consistent. And there was only like a decrease of 1% in the number of abortion clinics and 4% in the number of abortion providers between that time. So that would not explain a 13% drop.
Right.
So the numbers fell from, let me get the, here we go. Here we go. Where is it? Help me out. Someone save me. Okay, so I'll give you the raw numbers. Nope. I lost it. There we go. Okay.
There we go.
There we go.
Nothing but class.
Nothing but class. I'm fact-checking a podcast. It's terrible. So according to the report, the abortion rate dropped to 16.9 per 1,000 women ages 15 to 44, which is the normal way these things are measured. Mm-hmm. At the peak, abortions in America, it was 29.3 per 1,000 in 1981, and at the time of Roe v. Wade, it was 16.3 per 1,000. So we're now basically, if I read these statistics right, almost statistically no statistical difference between 1973 and the 2011 numbers. And again, this is down 13% from 2008. Now, there are a couple theories kicked around about, depending on what side of the aisle. Guttmacher explains this saying, A, contraception was easier, more easily available, and more used. That makes sense, right?
Yeah.
If you're having, the birth rate dropped in that same time, so that doesn't make sense. If the birth rate dropped and abortions dropped, that means the only explanation is either people are having less sex, which historically speaking is unlikely.
No.
Or people better using contraception, which is more logical. Right-wing pro-life groups, self-described pro-life groups, say it's because their tactics are working.
Right.
I think for me, from a theological perspective, anytime abortion numbers drop through means that can be explained through, not through making it illegal and forcing it underground, but like ways that there are fewer abortions, this is probably a good thing.
Very much so.
Because regardless of your stance on abortions can be hugely psychologically damaging for the couple involved. And I mean, it's a terribly painful experience that no one should have to go through. And it's nice to see, because I mean, to me, what makes sense, I agree with Guttmacher, it's probably better access and use of proper contraception. Right. That's a good thing. Where I want to start to make the right side of the aisle think a little bit is they want abortions to stop. Okay, great. We've seen an actual way to make abortions decrease. We found it. Like, abortions decreased.
Yeah.
Hallelujah, okay?
By a very big percent.
This is not like statistical insignificant territory. This is like for real.
Yeah.
And then it happened through contraception. So why on earth are you fighting against contraception? Why on earth are you doing that? If you want to stop abortions, here's a guaranteed, scientifically, statistically proven way to do it. Okay? Done. Done and done. So what on earth are we fighting about?
Well, one of my Catholic friends when I was in college, he, she, it, I don't want to give anything away. He, she, it.
Hesh.
Hesh?
Hesh. He, she.
Like Hessian?
She. Yeah, he, she.
Well, the Hessian once said...
There you go. That's smart.
Once said that the reason that Catholics didn't approve of contraception was because it was, number one, it was stopping the natural process of life forming.
Yes.
Number two, it decreased communication between a couple, so it made for a stronger marriage. And I'm like, That's great. Those are perfectly good reasons. I can accept them.
I'm not saying that everyone.
Not everyone. I'm just giving you the reasons why.
Sure.
Some of our Catholic friends will say that, and that's great. As for our Protestant friends, who there's really no.
It just means people will have more sex. But okay.
But people are gonna have sex anyway. Let's just be honest with ourselves. When I'm describing the Methodist Church's stance on contraceptions, my response is, and I say, well, it kind of sort of sounds like in the social principles that obviously the best way to prevent an unplanned pregnancy or sexually transmitted diseases or anything like that is to wait until you're married.
Someone explained that to 16-year-old me.
And then I said, however, I think the Methodist Church realizes that 99% of the human population ain't going to do that. So if you are going to do that, slap a condom on. That's the quick and dirty.
Quick and dirty
description. But I think it's logical. It's like I am pro telling the truth about sexual health. I am pro telling the truth that says, yes, if you want to guarantee you don't have a baby until you're married with the right guy, you don't have sex until you're married to the right guy or girl.
However, we live in a fallen world. And
it doesn't even have to be in a fallen world.
My teenage life was particularly fallen.
We live in a world where there is something that is enjoyable out there, and as human beings, we like things that are enjoyable.
Especially in a down economy.
Heck, we just had 2 inches of snow that kept the entire city in. I bet you 9 months from now.
The same thing happened in D.C. during snowpocalypse. We were held inside for 2 weeks, and there was a huge baby bump.
Yep.
So, I mean, yeah.
But getting back to the main point of this, it's like you have a tried and true way of preventing abortions. Or not preventing abortions, but making them less common.
Driving down abortion
rates, which ultimately is what you want to do.
I mean, I guess.
Is there a common ground? That both sides can meet in?
Depends who you're talking to. I mean, the Catholic Church. Okay, let me throw out some real statistics here.
Okay.
94% of Catholic women in the United States of America use modern contraception. 94%.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. I think that is actually a Guttmacher number. Anyways, I am pretty firm on that statistic. It's like 94%. Firm on that statistic. Give me the quick and dirty answer.
PG-13.
You could do this all day long. So while there's this religious argument out there, the majority of Catholic couples are using contraception. Now, the folks who aren't can write into the show and explain that. And I get that. And I'm not arguing that that everyone has to be using contraception. That's not my point. My point is, if you are Catholic and that's your religious decision, fine. Okay? Mm-hmm. Absolutely fine. I respect that right. What I don't respect is the right to impose that on others. And that's just the pure and simple. And I have this about a lot of, faith-based issues. Mm-hmm. It is fine to believe whatever. Okay? Don't impose that on other people. Especially when it accomplishes something else you so desperately want.
Yeah.
Like, play ball here. You want to stop abortions? What works is contraception.
Yeah.
And what works, and this is what the Catholics do in regards to abortion that I have a lot of respect for. Catholics take care of unwed mothers like you would not believe. And that also prevents abortion. Mm-hmm. When it takes away the stigma and they feel like they have a place to go, that does stop abortions. Right. Absolutely. And I commend the Catholic Church for all of the work they do in that area. I had a really good friend of mine who was pregnant at 15 and had the kid at 16, who went to a special home where the Catholic Church cared for her, loved her, help facilitate the adoption with a whole bunch of open clauses that she can still go see the kid on a regular basis. It was a net positive, and she graduated on time. Mm-hmm. Okay? So, huge props for that. Absolutely. But if you really want to drive down a significant number of abortions that aren't happening in the Catholic community, because only Catholic youth are going to really think to go to the Catholic places, it's contraception.
Yeah.
And full stop.
And I just want to know how the next time they release numbers with the whole Affordable Care Act mandating that most employers have to provide contraception.
Well, it's going to be an interesting. There's going to be two competing things there, because the next numbers, so they do them every 3 years. They're going to do the survey again this year.
Yeah.
And so we'll get these numbers in 2017.
Mm-hmm.
Ugh. So when we get the numbers in 2017,
we'll be live on the air.
We'll be, hopefully, pray. When we get those numbers, there's going to be two competing things that both could be potentially driving down the number of abortions. One, the more restrictive laws.
Yes.
Two, the impact of the Affordable Care Act. And it'll be interesting to see how Guttmacher parses that numbers, because I couldn't begin to know how. You have to break it out regionally.
And you'd also have to break it out by employer, too, because there are some that's like, oh, I was employed by Catholic University Hospitals. They don't provide birth control for me. I was employed by Hobby Lobby. They don't provide birth control for me.
The Hobby Lobby doesn't?
They're in the midst of a fight because they don't want to, because they are faith-based
I didn't know they were faith-based. I can't talk either.
They are a faith-based.
Faith-based business.
Yeah.
I can't talk.
One of their big things is and that's the big thing. Hobby Lobby is fighting this because they're like, we don't want to provide birth control for our employees because we feel that.
But it's not like it's not like they're dispensing it. Well, they are paid. They are paying,
and and that's the thing, is like saying that's just us providing it through a third party, and we can't have that. And it'll be interesting to see how the court rules on that, because it's one of those. To me, I mean, they struck down the court just struck down clergy being able to write off our housing on our taxes as against the federal court in Wisconsin did. Let's get that in our our mind. So a court did. But my point is they used the establishment clause for that. And I bet in the end this is going to come down to an establishment clause thing. Yeah, it is. We'll see. I mean, we'll see. And if Hobby Lobby is a privately owned business, I can see them saying, "Yeah, you don't have to provide." No, I don't know, because it starts to feel like, because ACA, Affordable Care Act, apply. Yeah, well, Citizens United stated that corporations are people too, to use the Mitt Romney terms, but it says that corporations have the same rights and privileges when it comes to political funding that individuals do. Yeah. And therefore they can say that, well, you gave us individual rights as... And the court ruled that was the case? The Supreme Court and Citizens United said that corporations had the ability to express themselves as people, in a political field, so they could donate as much as they want, basically, is what happened. And so this way they can just use that and say, you've already given us some individual rights as a corporation, as an incorporated body here. I hadn't thought. We're just adding on to that. We're a private entity. We're not owned by a public. We're not owned by public shares. I had not thought about that argument. That is pretty genius. Yeah. I don't agree, but that's pretty bloody genius. Oh yes. Man, I'm good at lawyering. I'm not a lawyer though. Neither am I, but we both have spent some time working for lawyers and court systems. Exactly. That's that I can see a judge. I can see the Supreme Court going that way. Especially with Roberts at the helm. Now I am actually kind of blown away by the intelligence of that argument. Let's be clear, I disagree, but touche. Yeah. Touche, Citizens United. So there's no real good way to transition out of that except to say moving on. Yep. So now we're going to move on to something kind of completely different in this week's discussion. We're holding because there's no sound effect in the video this week because I don't have a producer this week. Okay, that's probably long enough. Wonderful. So, we in my congregation, it's been a pretty tragic 2-3 weeks. We've had several folks pass away. A congregant that I care deeply about, a man who's like a father figure for him, was murdered last week.
Went to an open casket visitation right before coming on the show. Lots of folk are sick and dying and in the hospital. One guy is in the hospital with having his back worked on, but he's also suffering from dementia, and so that's making his care, his medical care, very complicated. Because rehabilitation is difficult in the best of circumstances, but when you're not really sure what's going on all the time, it really starts to complicate things. And so I'm not naming names or giving any more details than that, but just needless to say that there's a lot to be praying about in my congregation, and I've been having to do a lot of kind of pastoral care in deeply tragic moments. I often half-jokingly say that pastors deal in the best moments of your life and the worst moments of your life. And to a certain extent, that's true. Mm-hmm. You think about it, best moments, weddings, coming to Christ, baptisms, and then funerals and hospital calls and, moments of desperation. And so I just wanted to open up the floor for a discussion of pastoral care. And what do you say in these situations? And what do you do in these situations? I mean, I have my own ideas and my own thoughts, and I try to muddle through as best I can. But, what do you do?
It's one of those weird things where, for me, pastoral care in times of we can't
times
talk
of trouble.
In times
Mother Mary, come to me. Hear these words of wisdom.
Speaking of times of tragedy right now. But in these times of tragedy, the best thing you can do is just be what's lovingly called the ministry of presence.
Sure.
Just be there for someone. As you know, Kathleen has started CPE, and she was...
What is CPE? I get to do this to you.
Oh, yes, that's right. CPE stands for Clinical Pastoral Education. What that is she's doing for this semester, one of her classes is hospital chaplaincy. And so she's in a hospital, and she's doing that. And she was like, before she started, I said we like I'm doing it, but before she started, she asked me, because I'd done it before, and she asked me, well, what do you do? And I said, when you get there, I jokingly said, when you get to a person, you ask, can I get you a Coke? And that's just a very silly way of saying, you just say, is there anything I can do for you? And if they say no, that's great. If they say yes, that's great too. It's just a lot of times people, especially people like me, we just want someone to know, we want someone that we know is there for us.
Sure.
For whatever we need. Because, when something like this happens, you might not know what you need. You might not know what you want at the time, because it's a very crazy time. I
find myself having really rambling conversations with folks. Because, they just want to talk about anything but what's going on.
Yeah.
And then often it circles around to really poignant reflections on the person who was just lost, or on the pain they're experiencing. But, it's just, we talked about the Korean War, and we talked, we talk about anything. And, one of the rules I have is I try to say as little as possible.
Oh, yeah.
And not because, partly what on earth do you say, but partly because that way they know they're just I'm saying enough to make sure they know I'm listening.
Yeah.
Right? I might ask a question, or, ask to know more about the person, or, I try to, what they call active listening, right?
Yeah.
Where I'm giving them enough, that it's clear that I'm listening and that I'm very interested in what they have to say, but I try not to offer platitudes because
yeah, people in that situation, they don't need platitudes. They just need to let it go, let it out. I almost said let it go. No, they don't need to let it go. They just need to let it out. They need to have someone they can vent to. And I think the worst times, and I'm sure there's a lot of us that are guilty of it, the worst that pastoral care can be is when you try to offer advice that's in the realm of, well, you just need more Jesus in your life.
Or
you just need more of this religious good that I'm offering.
Or when you try to move them out of lament.
Yeah.
I mean, okay, if this is dragging on for months, you can, in Christian love and affection, start to try to pull them in another direction. Mm-hmm. But, I'm doing a lot of dealing like within the week of this thing occurring. Yeah. You let them live in that lament. Mm-hmm. And you let them live in the sadness, and you recognize that as real, and mm-hmm. not, if you had more faith, you wouldn't be so sad. They're with Jesus. Well, they are presumably they are with Jesus, but that doesn't mean you don't miss them, and that doesn't mean it wasn't painful or sudden or whatever.
Or if you say something like, well, he or she's just gone home. Why wasn't this their home? There's right. that whole mentality of, if they're going home when you pass away, then they're not really at home with you. And then that's like, well, what could I have done better? And that just gets more and more levels going on.
To be clear, when they tell that to me,
yeah.
I let that stand.
This is not a time where you're like, well, that's bad theology.
Like when they say,
Schleiermacher.
When they say, well, they've just gone home, and I say, we can be thankful for that.
Yes.
But that doesn't mean we don't miss them. Yeah. And that doesn't mean that it isn't hard. Yeah. But we can take. You're right. They have gone home.
But that has to come from the person
right.
who's grieving.
I don't offer
come
that
from people on the outside, because at that moment, we are completely 100% on the outside.
Right.
We can be empathetic, we can be sympathetic, but we can't be them.
Right. I mean, the closest I've come to that is I had a situation where a person was very worried whether the recently deceased man had been saved or had lived a Christian life, and all I said was, God never gives up on people. God and we went to the verse with like, nothing can separate you from the love of God.
Right.
And that's as close as I came to. Well, he's gone home. That God never gives up, and that nothing can separate us from the love of God.
And when you're doing pastoral care, you've got to be able to read the moment. You've got to be able to know when it's appropriate and when it's not appropriate.
And you may or may not be standing in your kitchen half naked making lasagna when that moment occurs. I'm just saying that sometimes you're making lasagna without a shirt on, and you have to do a pastoral care call over the phone.
Yes.
That may or may not have happened recently in my life.
And on that note...
But one thing, I remember as a somewhat troubled youth, one thing we would always seek to avoid as young people was pastoral care.
Yeah.
We did anything to get out of it. We would lie by the seat of our pants and make everything seem perfectly okay to get out of the pastor's office. Mm-hmm. Like that is like, when we, the troubled and depressed youth of my church, ended up in the pastor's office, like we did whatever we could to not be in there. And I've often reflected, like, why is that? Because I love my church family and I love my church home, and I have a tense relationship with the city of my birth in general, but, in the end, it's probably a net positive, and I'm partly who I am today because of that church. Why did we seek to get out of it? And I keep coming back to what they say. They weren't telling us anything that was relevant, and it never felt like they knew us. Mm-hmm. And I think it was a lack of listening.
Yeah.
From the pastoral staff at that time. Like, we could explain, but we didn't want to because we didn't feel like we were being listened to. And I think that's informed at least my pastoral care of don't say much.
Yeah.
Because I have no idea what they're going through. The closest I get to that is I can imagine. If they call me on it, you're right. I can't. That was a dumb thing to say.
Yep. Sorry about that.
Just to listen and to go, yeah. No, I do a lot of that. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Yeah.
And just, make it clear that, like, what they're saying, even if I can't connect directly with it, I hear in them what that means. Mm-hmm. So, as with any of these things we talk about, there is no resolution.
There's no right or wrong answer.
Well, I think actually that there are many wrong things to do here.
There are wrong things to do.
There are closer to wrong answers in this one than we usually get.
That's good. And we'll have a list of those wrong answers.
For instance, it's not all in God's plan. Even if it is all in God's plan, it is not in God's plan. That is not what you say.
Or here's one of my favorites. Oh, things work out in the end.
Yeah, at the eschaton, moving on. At the end of the age, sure. But at the moment, my father was murdered or whatever.
The best thing to say is, it sucks, and it's okay for it to suck.
Yeah, that
sucks. Don't say that, but have that as your underlying meaning. Is it sucks, and it's okay.
And, I always close with, if you ever need me, call me.
Yep.
I'm always a phone call away. I have to be 100 miles from my congregation half the week. I said I may be 100 miles physically gone, but I'm always a phone call away, and close with, I care about you.
Mm-hmm.
And then, that's all I can leave it with, to be honest. I care about you too, our loving audience. If you have any feedback for us, SYN Boldly at endfear.org, facebook.com/the Sign Your Name Project, or at SYN Boldly on Twitter. And go in peace to love and serve the Lord and end fear by signing your name. Good night.